Hello, I'm the Resolute Cartographer, and this is the history of Point Pleasant. In Fallout 76, Point Pleasant is one of the 17 real-world towns that can be found in in-game Appalachia. But as it lays off the path of the main quest, you may not have ever ventured here. I visited Point Pleasant during the beta, but I hadn't returned there until I started researching the location. In the game world, Point Pleasant shares a few similarities with the real-world version of the city, but there are several differences. In this video, I'll go over the real-world history of the city, and then move on to what Point Pleasant was like in the Fallout universe up to the Great War and beyond. Also, while West Virginia wasn't an entity until 1861, and the state wasn't a state until 1863, for clarity's sake, I'm going to refer to the part of the Colony of Virginia and later State of Virginia that became West Virginia as West Virginia. We'll start the history of Point Pleasant in 1749, when the area on which the town is located, the junction of the Ohio River and the Kanawha River, was on the wild western frontier of the Virginia colony. On the 18th of August, 1749, the French explorer Pierre-Joseph Céloron de Blainville, sorry if I butchered that, buried a lead plaque at the site, attesting to his expedition's purpose to make peace with the local native tribes and reclaim the area in the name of King Louis XV. His expedition was a failure, though, as the local tribes were friendly to the British, and eventually the French ceded the territory to the British with the Treaty of Paris that ended the French and Indian War in 1763. On November 5, 1768, the Treaty of Fort Stanwix was signed by the representatives of the British and the Six Nations of the Iroquois, with the Iroquois ceding lands that included the territory that would become West Virginia to the British. Colonel George Washington visited the land that would become Point Pleasant on a surveying expedition in 1770 before camping at a spot 14 miles up the Kanawha River, proclaiming an abundance of wild game and fowl in a report. British colonists pushed into the interior and came in contact with more local tribes that had been unrepresented in the Treaty of Fort Stanwix and thus were not bound to it. In May 1774, Virginian Royal Governor John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore, asked the House of Burgesses to declare a state of war on the hostile Indian nations following increasing tension and violence. On October 10, 1774, near the place the Wyandot called Tuindeway, or the point between two rivers, sorry if I butchered that as well, Colonel Andrew Lewis, for whom Lewisburg is named, established Camp Point Pleasant. The 1,000 Virginia militiamen under Colonel Lewis met somewhere from 300 to 500 Shawnee warriors under the Shawnee leader Cornstalk. The Virginians won the Battle of Point Pleasant, and the Shawnees ceded claim to all land south of the Ohio River. A small fort, Fort Blair, was built on the site, but it was abandoned at the outbreak of the Revolutionary War in 1775 as one of the final acts of the royal governor before he was ousted by the rebels. In 1776, the Virginia Assembly, alarmed by their unprotected western frontier, ordered the construction of Fort Randolph, built on the site of the Battle of Point Pleasant. When native raids were undeterred by this fort, the fort's defenders detained the Shawnee leader Cornstalk and 3 companions, holding them hostage in an attempt to keep the Shawnee neutral in the Revolutionary War. On November 10, 1777, a militiaman was killed by a native outside the fort. The slain militiaman's enraged comrades stormed in and murdered Cornstalk and his companions. Virginia's governor, Patrick Henry, attempted to try the killers for murder, but no one would testify against them. The fort survived a siege by the Wyandot and Mingo tribes in 1778, but was abandoned in 1779 and subsequently burned by the natives. The fort was rebuilt in 1785 after the Revolution in preparation for the Northwest Indian War of 1785 to 1795, and rebuilt again as a historical replica outside of Point Pleasant in time for the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Point Pleasant on October 10, 1974. In 1794, Point Pleasant received its charter from the Virginia General Assembly. As the frontier moved west, Point Pleasant became a more stable location. In 1804, the Virginia General Assembly carved Mason County off of Kanawha County, and Point Pleasant became the county seat. It served as a port on the Ohio for settlements on the Kanawha River. As West Virginia began its split from Virginia in 1861, brother against brother fighting was a very real occurrence in Mason County. The county supplied the Union with 1,000 men and the Confederacy 61 men. On October 10, 1901, the Point Pleasant Monument in Tuindeway State Park was dedicated by the Daughters of the American Revolution to commemorate the Battle of Point Pleasant. This battle is sometimes referred to as the First Battle of the Revolutionary War, although I don't subscribe to that idea. From 1942 to 1945, the West Virginia Ordinance Works, located 5 miles north of Point Pleasant, served as a munitions manufacturing plant employing 3,500 people at its peak. While it was shut down in 1945, it still contains live ammunition, and in 1979, red water was found by fishermen to be seeping from the site. In 1981, the site was discovered to be leaking TNT and its precursors into the local environment. In 1983, the site was admitted to the National Priorities List, making it eligible for cleanup as part of the Superfund program. and while some parts have been cleaned, as of 2007 it was still not fully decontaminated. While today it is technically known as the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, locals are known to refer to it as the TNT area. It was at this site in 1966 that the first sighting of the Mothman is said to have been made. On December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge, anchored on its east end in Point Pleasant, collapsed during rush hour traffic, killing 46 people and injuring 9 others. This collapse, along with the attested sightings of the Mothman at the time, are at the heart of the 1975 book The Mothman Prophecies, which loosely inspired the 2002 movie by the same name. The bridge collapse occurred in the Fallout universe as well, as evidenced by the plaque memorializing the event, and the Christmas tree that you can find at the bottom of the Ohio, as the collapse took place during the Christmas season. Interestingly, to me at least, is the fact that this replacement bridge for the Silver Bridge in the Fallout universe was built on the same site as the original bridge, while the real-world Silver Memorial Bridge was built just south of Point Pleasant across the Kanawha River. This difference is likely in part due to the fact that the in-game Point Pleasant is not on the Kanawha River unless you count this drainage ditch as the Kanawha River, which I don't, given the size of the Kanawha River. As with all in-game locations, the area of the town is truncated and lies on the upward-sloping ridge, while the real-life town lays on flatter ground. Point Pleasant in the real world is believed to have about 4,100 residents, with the population having been on the decline since the 1970s, although the decline appears to have slowed over the decades. As Point Pleasant lies on the Ohio River, the main town is surrounded by a flood barrier of walls in some areas and earthen berms in others. Point Pleasant's real-world Riverfront Park exists in Fallout 76 and is home to the Mothman Cult's sacrificial altar. There is a Jeep in town which I can use to mention that Carl Probst, the designer of the original Jeep prototype, was born in Point Pleasant in 1883, but that mostly concludes the extent of my research on the real-world Point Pleasant, so let's go over the in-game town. In terms of housing, Point Pleasant has 6 houses, apartments over shops, and a hotel. Community buildings include a church with an attached cemetery and a survivor cemetery located next door, a post office, a theater, a Mothman museum, and an adjacent Mothman statue. It should be noted that the Mothman Museum and statues are facets of the real world as well, but to my knowledge, the basement shrine to the Mothman and sacrificial altar on the Ohio are not. In terms of commerce, the town has a bank, a barber shop, a hunting supply store, a pharmacy, a hardware store, a feed store, an electronics store, a veterinary clinic, a liquor store, a dry cleaner, a deli, an ice cream shop, and what I assume is a restaurant, Bernardo's. While the available lore on Point Pleasant is sparse, there are a few things that we can piece together. On Thursday, October 21st, 2077, the cult of the Mothman met in the secret shrine hidden beneath the Mothman Museum. They met to summon the Mothman, seeking his wisdom of disasters to come so they might protect themselves. The next day, Friday, October 22nd, 2077, it was preached that the Mothman had appeared, and whispered a portent. He warned that the next day a terrible flood would come. This flood would arrive early in the day and wash the non-believers away as the chosen of the Mothman sought shelter on higher ground. At 9:47 the following day, October 23rd, 2077, the flood came in the form of nuclear fire. Many of the chosen, though, were tucked away in the Lucky Hole mine when the radioactive ash began to fall out. After the nuclear winter, the people of Point Pleasant emerged and tried to secure their town. Walls of junk went up. Barricades controlled the entrances to the town and formed a protective ring around Main Street. Eventually, the responders arrived and did what they could to shore up the order in the town, reinforcing the walls of the local church and turning it into the local command center and medical facility. Once again on the frontiers of civilization, Point Pleasant was low on resources and manpower. While other towns in the region engaged in commerce with each other, Point Pleasant is without a Vinderbot. Many of the barricades are shoddily built or incomplete. As the scorch began to spread across Appalachia, those who remained in Point Pleasant faced a choice: fight or flee. While many chose to stay, there are those who fled, attempting to escape the oncoming rush of abominations that staggered in from the east. Whether they fell before or after the siege of Morgantown Airport, Point Pleasant fell to the scorched, and those monsters still make up the bulk of the hostile population there. The bridge across the Ohio River tells a story of the final days of Point Pleasant. As though barricaded, it lies in ruins. As the scorched spread out across the countryside, they eventually closed in on Point Pleasant. The responders purposely destroyed the bridge in the face of imminent defeat in an attempt to contain the Scorched on the southeastern side of the Ohio River. Waves of the Scorched crashed against the barricades, eroding the remaining defenders until they made their last stand in the church. But that's really the main thrust of what we can determine from the evidence at hand. There is a list of medical supplies scavenging sites that the responders were planning on searching, but it raises questions. AVR Medical had already been searched by Maria Chavez herself. Others were clearly closer to the responders' outpost, like Arcos Pharma and Vaultec University. This could indicate that Point Pleasant was in overall charge of the responders' medical supplies, or it could indicate that they survived the destruction of the Morgantown airport, being that they were out of radio range of the headquarters, and they may not have known to go and help. And they may have been trying to shore up their position before they were overrun, and ended up searching places they didn't know had already been searched, because their friends and allies were already dead. My hope is that, as isolated as Point Pleasant is, and uninvolved in the overall story, that we'll see some wastelanders settle here. And with any luck, they'll be the people who fled Point Pleasant in the first place, and will be able to fill in the holes in our understanding. This has been the Resident Cartographer. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. If you want to get notifications as to when these videos become available, hit the notification bell. If you liked it, hit the like button. If you have any comments or questions, leave them for me and I'll try to get back to you. And I hope to see everybody again next time. Thanks for watching.